Hi, I'm Aaron. I'm 30 and up until recently I thought I was doing pretty well. But now that Ashley, who I think is my true love, has come along, I'm trying to pick up the pieces. I know this is going to be a long story, but I think writing it down might help me get it all out in one go. So let's get started so you can get some background. My life has always been pretty unusual. My friends used to tease me about it. I was known as the trust fund baby, the man who had an endless supply of money and traveled the world partying. That picture couldn't be more inaccurate, though. My parents do have a sizable trust fund for me, but I've understood since I was a small child that they put a lot of effort into accumulating that money. I know from personal experience that starting a business is difficult and that one mistake might ruin it all. I've thus worked hard to develop. I've also made sure to protect what my father created. From the start, I had to manage relationships in college. It seemed like everyone was more interested in what I could provide than in who I was. I never dated anyone. I've always thought of dating as a journey rather than a chance to hook up. It was difficult to tell if people were truly interested in me or just my family's money. That all changed when I met Ashley. I met her at my graduation celebration. She didn't seem to know about my background, which was nice. We started chatting and got on really well. We exchanged numbers. I thought she'd be disappointed when I took her to McDonald's on our first date, but she seemed really happy. I knew I was falling for her then. Ashley was clever, funny, and self-reliant, was just like I had imagined. She didn't seem to be trying to impress me with anything phony. I had finally met someone who saw past my family's financial situation. I felt like I could finally be myself around her. After about a month of dating, I took her to meet my parents. I interpreted her friendliness and apparent indifference to their money as positive signs. I never considered the possibility that her composure was a premeditated action. I realized that her acceptance was a premeditated action. I had entire faith in her, but after giving it some serious thought, I was concerned that my trust in her might lead to problems. I proposed a year later. We had spent many hours discussing our goals and aspirations for the future. Ashley asked my parents to never ask her to give up her career. That was her only request. My mother loved her even more because she wanted to continue trying to improve our future. It felt like the ideal solution. Ashley worked at an IT company and was doing well for herself. Fast forward to our second anniversary. My parents gave her a big gift and hosted a party for us. They suggested she be added as a beneficiary to the family trust fund, alongside me. It was a big vote of confidence from my parents, since it meant she was now involved in everything they had fought so hard to achieve. Rob was the trustee who oversaw the trust's finances and legal affairs. She was introduced to the trust's finances and legal affairs by them. I thought she was just being friendly with Rob and the others. I had no idea Ashley and Rob had lots of chances to get to know each other. They often hid in corners at events and laughed a lot. I didn't think anything of it. I didn't think she was having an affair. Why would she? She was my spouse. And until recently, that was all there was to it. I had complete trust in her. Tragedy struck about 7 years into our marriage. My parents died within a few months of each other. I was devastated. I wasn't prepared for losing both parents so quickly. I threw myself into work to try to cope. The business was my father's legacy. I felt that the only way I could honor him was to keep it going. However, Ashley started to stray as I pushed myself into work. I initially believed it was her own doing. After the funerals, she was often absent and rarely spoke to me. She didn't seem to care about my personal struggles. 2 weeks went by, and I realized her distance had little to do with mourning. I decided to leave work early one evening to try to contact her. The silence between us was getting too great. I thought a small gesture might help. I even took the time to pick up her favorite flowers. Pink roses. I was pretty blown away when I came home to find Rob and Ashley there. Rob had his bags packed, and Ashley had her suitcases. I was like, "What's going on here?" Somehow, Rob had gotten into my house. "Are you here to discuss the trust or something?" I asked. "Oh well, I was planning to leave you a note," but I guess I'll have to do this face to face. Ashley spoke up, her words icy and her expression one I'd never seen before. She seemed almost smug as she informed me she was leaving me. She said she was moving in with Rob after our brief vacation in Italy. She also said she was divorcing me, but didn't look too sad. She asked if the flowers were for her and said she appreciated them, but didn't need them right now. After 12 years of marriage, it all came to an end in a single breath. Before I could even comprehend what was happening, they were gone. I stayed inside the house for 2 days, not taking a shower, eating or sleeping. I just sat there, drowned in shock and pain, watching the TV to keep me company. When the phone rang, I couldn't even bring myself to answer it. I felt like a hollow shell of myself that could hardly function. I hardly tasted a bite of cup noodles quickly became my best friend. I didn't answer the doorbell at first, but after a few days, it started to sound like an alarm. It didn't matter who was on the other side. The rings were short at first, then longer. It seemed like they were getting more and more frustrated, so they started using the buzzer. After about 10 minutes of continuous buzzing, I finally gave in. Whoever it was didn't care that I wasn't responding. They didn't leave a message. A peace suit greeted me as I dragged myself to the door. She stared at me as if I were a puzzle that needed to be solved. She said, "Your wife ran off with my husband, and sitting here like a wuss isn't going to help anyone." Before I had a chance to think, "Get up, take a bath and come see me in the living room. We can discuss a lot." I just stood there in disbelief as she entered my home and vanished down the hallway muttering something about the stench. I considered calling her. I was a bit taken aback at first, but she shot back that she'd heard that in spite of myself. I smiled. She'd already tidied up my mess, taken out the trash, folded the blankets, and made the kitchen look presentable. When I shuffled into the living room after taking a shower, there was something about her blazing intensity and unrelenting persistence that made me feel like I was waking up. I was still unable to identify this woman. I sat down, and she finally introduced herself. "I'm Rob's wife," she said. Sandra had been trying to get in touch with me at work for the past 2 days without success, so she decided to stop by in person. She had done some serious research and wasn't simply here to rant. I was hiding beneath the blankets, but she was doing the exact opposite. She had already discovered Rob's Facebook chats on his laptop and learned the whole unpleasant truth. It turned out that Rob and Ashley had been having an affair for years. They had taken business trips together and showered each other with money from my family's trust fund. They planned to use the remaining funds to pursue their ideal life overseas. But that wasn't the worst of it. Sandra revealed that Rob had been secretly withdrawing funds from the trust fund and cheating on her. He started modestly but gradually gained confidence, depending on Ashley's assistance as a coach. Sandra went on. "If you don't want to, you don't have to join me in this. You know, it seems like you and Rob were in this together, living a parallel life while I was unaware of it." I gazed into her furious, resolute eyes and something clicked inside of me. But I wanted my life back, and I wasn't going to let these two walk away with everything. This woman was a tough opponent, and I was starting to think I could trust her. We shook hands, and that was the start of our partnership. Sandra and I were coming up with a plan to make sure she and Rob were held accountable for what they'd done, while my ex. After 10 days in Italy, they came back looking refreshed, tanned and completely unaware that we wanted them to return from their little vacation to a world where their web of lies would start to fall apart, one thread at a time. Sandra and I waited, but Ashley didn't get back to us straight away. We knew chaos would soon ensue, and that call finally arrived on Monday. As soon as I took up the phone, Ashley became agitated and began to yell. "What the hell is going on, Aaron? What is Rob doing?" She also wanted to know where her money was. She seemed more angry than scared, and I clenched my fists at the ridiculousness of her query. I waited for her to finish before responding. "Oh, you mean the money Rob has been using for your little vacations that my parents left in a trust for me? I hope my lawyer has gotten back to you already. Rob's wife, Sandra, is also involved in this." Before she could say anything, I hung up that evening when I got off work. I discovered Ashley waiting by my car. I suggested. I told her to talk to her lawyer. I'd known her for years and I'd never seen her so upset and out of control. She tried to play the victim, saying Rob was exaggerating and making things seem worse than they were. She pleaded with me to explain everything in simple terms, as though that would make things better. I took a deep breath and told her I'd already spoken to her lawyer about her divorce request. I could tell she hadn't expected to get nothing. Her face went pale and I saw real panic for a second. I'd loved and trusted her, but I just felt a weird sense of satisfaction as I saw her fall apart. She stumbled and tried to speak, but I was done. I walked past her and got in my car. Sandra called me. On my way home, Rob gave me another revision. He'd been fired from his job, and the company's reputation suffered when word of his treachery spread. The business was forced to sever relations with Rob as soon as possible since clients were threatening to terminate contracts. Sandra had gone above and beyond. She'd even made arrangements for one of the town's top lawyers to take on the impending court cases. She was certain that she would also be granted full custody of their daughter, Emily. I felt it was like a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I no longer had to deal with the fallout alone, and my parents' legacy was secure. I knew we'd make Rob and Ashley pay for everything they'd done because Sandra was a force to be reckoned with. I felt a spark of hope when I arrived home, something I hadn't felt in weeks. When I sat down to write down my ideas, I discovered that Sandra was a friend and an ally, which was much better than retaliation. Days after that parking lot encounter with Ashley, I was still feeling the pain of everything that had happened, but for the first time since Ashley had left with Rob, I felt like I might finally be able to start picking up the pieces and moving on. The real work was only just beginning. All I wanted was to completely forget about the disaster, but that was not possible. Ashley and Rob were more than just a bother to ignore. They were a tempest that tore through my life and destroyed everything I believed to be true. A week went by without hearing from Ashley. But I knew that wouldn't last and it wasn't finished yet. Sandra, on the other hand, was there for me like a rock, checking in and providing information. Then one night I received a call from Ashley that almost broke my heart. It was as though all of that rage had suddenly turned into something else, possibly sorrow or guilt. Her voice was softer than I had ever heard it. I was unable to confirm after asking if I had eaten dinner. She paused and then asked if she could come and make it for me. I finally found my voice, and she said she'd be at my apartment in 30 minutes, so I guess my silence must have sounded like a yes to her. "You're not coming over, Ashley?" I said. "Do you mean me?" The words just came out. "You want to come here, make supper and play house after what you did?" After a little period of silence, she added, "Aaron, please. Don't. We need to discuss." But I know things became nasty. If I remain here, I have not left. I'm in the wrong. I let out a sore chuckle. "You consider stealing and cheating to be bad. That was ruthless and vicious and self-dash." Then came the line that finally put everything into perspective. She said she never wanted to see my face again. Despite her calm demeanor, she advised me to stop overreacting. I felt my guilt about harming her go away for the first time. Her speech was devoid of any sadness, regret, or remorse. She didn't even feel bad about what she had done. She was just trying to wriggle her way out of trouble with this whole "I want to make dinner for you" thing. She began discussing the case and shouting about how unjust it was for me to paint her as a gold digger. She claimed she told me she had a great career and didn't need my money. I realized she was the same person I'd been dealing with for years. I wanted to remind her that I'd paid off all her student debts and show her the documents, but what use would that be? She'd obviously been lying all along. Finally, she asked if we could put it all behind us and reconcile. I was so shocked that I hardly spoke, but I eventually managed to ask her about Rob. She even had the nerve to tell me to drop the lawsuit because it was pointless. "Rob," she said in a casual tone, as though we were discussing dinner plans, "he's a different person, you know." He added excitement to my life. "It's not my fault that our relationship has become stale. Additionally, you were constantly away at work." What a brat she was. She defended her entire affair with him by claiming that I was to blame, as though her excitement was worth ruining our marriage and betraying my confidence. She kept going on about how Rob was passionate, which was a departure from the routine I'd presumably forced upon her. She wanted me to apologize. I told her I wasn't going to take the lawsuit lying down. It was clear she was trying to control me again, but I wasn't having it. I called Sandra right away. She listened to my explanation of Ashley's call without interrupting. When I was done, she asked me to give her a call and extend the invitation. Sandra kept pushing, even though I was confused. Just go ahead, she said. Ashley picked up on the first ring, sounding arrogant, as if she had already won. She said, I'll explain everything when I get there, baby. I knew you would change your mind before I could even reply. She hung up. Sandra came before Ashley, who seemed serious but had a glint in her eye that suggested she had a plan. Ashley arrived a little later than expected, wearing one of her favorite dresses with her hair and makeup done perfectly. She asked me to make sure Ashley was seated in the dining room. She went into the dining room and then disappeared into the bedroom. She'd clearly worked hard, hoping that I'd be influenced by her appearance. She looked at the bedroom door and kissed my cheek, but I stopped her. She pouted and said, Oh, babe, let's talk in the dining room. Are you sure you won't let me in? Bedroom, is that how weak your love is? Will you simply discard me like this? Sandra left the bedroom and entered the dining room with her arms folded. I was about to reply when Ashley had a lovely expression on her face. She stammered, hardly able to form a sentence. Sandra gave a little grin and said hello. Ashley said, Nice to meet you at last. I'm pleased to finally meet the woman who is seeing my husband Rob. Ashley turned to face me, her eyes wide with anger and shock. Sandra was really angry and started shouting at me. She said that I'd ruined her life, that Rob had lost his job and that they now owed money because of a story that had gone around the office. Even my own supervisor won't look at me now. Sandra's eyes glistened. Ashley, what do you mean by debt? Have you borrowed money from Rob or did you both dip into the trust fund at the same time? Ashley yelled back without hesitation. Hell sure. I was since the beginning. I've stood behind Rob, and I had every right to. Andra said I genuinely care for him, unlike you. It's understandable that he chose me over you, since you never left this place. You have no place here. Sandra gave me a silent signal that she needed me to document it with a little nod. I stood up, opened the door, and waited for Ashley to go. I looked back at Sandra, bewildered and still trying to understand what had just happened. She was hurling a barrage of insults over her shoulder as she walked out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the walls. The tiny red light on the recording gadget she was holding up. She blinked, smiled, and said, We got it. It's all out in the open now. Everything came together. This was all part of Sandra's plan. We had it all on camera, and she knew that if we pushed Ashley too hard, he would crack. We have the evidence to prove that Ashley and Rob were up to no good. Sandra was a brilliant, shrewd, and brave person. I was in awe of her as she was leaving. She admitted that she was the one who had told Ashley's office about Rob. She was merciless and had made it plain that she would not stop until Rob and Ashley were held accountable. A few weeks went by after that altercation with Ashley and Sandra, and I saw everything we had started come to fruition. Sandra had recovered proof from Rob's laptop, and we captured a confession from Ashley. They were both going down. There was nothing they could do. Our lawyers filed the complaint right away, and Ashley's business was notified shortly after. Sandra was able to email the video and a thorough description of Ashley's betrayal to a former college buddy who worked at Ashley's firm. The repercussions were severe and swift. Ashley's reputation was ruined and she was quickly fired to protect the company's integrity. The firm let her go as soon as they learned that she had been lying to me and embezzling money. Rob had already lost his job and now Ashley was unemployed too, leaving them both struggling financially. Word got out about their romance and the stolen money, and Sandra phoned me every day with revisions. She was really enthusiastic and determined to make sure people knew what kind of people they were dealing with. She was battling for her daughter Emily, who was still too young to understand what had happened. Emily was so scared by what she'd seen, her dad, drunk and violent, beating on the door, that she wouldn't leave her room for days. Sandra called me one morning, her voice shaking with rage. Rob turned up at my house last night, drunk and out of control. He kept trying to break down the door, shouting at me and ringing the bell. Emily was scared, so she took a deep breath and carried on, hiding under her bed. I had to submit a restraining order this morning. I need to protect her from this insanity. The call came more suddenly than I thought. Now Sandra has to deal with this every day. Rob's actions have reached an unprecedented level, and Emily is devastated. I accepted Sandra's request to watch Emily for a few hours while she went to submit the papers. Sandra was worn out when I got there. After she left, I walked over to Emily's room and knocked on the door. I was suddenly apprehensive when she didn't answer. She didn't respond. She was hiding under the bed, holding a pillow to her chest and crying. I picked the lock and opened the door. "Are you friends with my dad?" she asked, looking up at me with wide eyes and obvious fear. Her voice was weak as she fumbled, so I knelt down to look her in the eyes. "No, Emily. I'm friends with your mom. My job is to make sure you're safe. Your dad isn't coming back," I said gently. She relaxed a bit, lowering her shoulders as she came out from under the bed. She gave a little smile before I switched on her favorite Disney film, after I told her I'd look after her and her mom while she was away. By the time she got back, Emily was fast asleep, her tiny hand clutching my shirt as if I were her lifeline. I'd warmed up some food for her, and before long she was snuggled up next to me on the couch, fast asleep. Sandra's tired face was softened by a grateful smile as she looked at us, protecting a child who needed stability, and supporting a friend who'd been through hell. And it was the first time I felt like I was really making a difference. Rob and Ashley found themselves in a tough spot as the legal battles dragged on. Sandra's lawyers made it clear they wouldn't back down until Rob and Ashley were held accountable. The court presented a lot of evidence, including the incriminating evidence from the initial hearing. The betrayal, the affair, and the stolen money were presented like a jumbled puzzle, with each piece further denouncing the defendants. It was an open and shut case, and even their lawyers couldn't provide much of a defense. Sandra and I knew the process would take a long time, but each step was a win. Sandra was adamant about having full custody of Emily, and she had a strong case thanks to the restraining order and the video proof of Rob's aggressive actions. Rob and Ashley would not receive a dime, and their hopes of a prosperous future were rapidly dwindling. They were done. They had no work and were in debt. One day, we met Rob outside the courthouse. He was disheveled and hollow-eyed. He looked awful, really under pressure. I saw him practically trip over himself as he walked towards Sandra, then collapse at his feet, pleading with her to accept him back without showing any sign of forgiveness. Sandra simply gazed down at him with icy eyes. "I'm done, Rob," she stated in a voice as hard as steel. "I need to keep my daughter safe, and that's all I care about." He slunk away despondent after the hearing. Sandra and I went for coffee, but we were both feeling the weight of the months we'd spent putting our lives back together. I could tell he knew it was done because of the dejected expression on his face, which told me he finally understood the disaster he made. Her eyes were warm and a little sad as she smiled at me from across the table. "Aaron, I don't know where I'd be without you. You've been more than just a friend to Emily and to me. You've kept me strong." I turned to face her, feeling the same way. Sandra was like family, not just an ally. Despite the heartache and betrayal that brought us together, we found strength in one another. As the weeks turned into months, the dust started to settle. We heard that Rob was being pursued by debt collectors. He was last spotted working as a janitor in a club across town. Ashley was also having trouble finding the life they had imagined together was just a dream. They were both stuck with the results of their own actions. Rob was ultimately refused visiting privileges, and Sandra was granted full custody of Emily. There was enough information presented to the court to conclude that he posed a risk to Sandra and their daughter. As for me, I felt lighter, free from the weight of betrayal and able to focus again on what mattered, honoring my parents' legacy, rebuilding my life, and maybe someday finding someone who would see me for who I am, not my money or my status. Sandra and I remained close friends, and I became somewhat of an uncle figure to Emily. Sandra finally found peace, and Emily was we were able to start moving forward in a home filled with stability and love. We would often hang out together at night, laughing, telling stories, and just being in the middle of all that turbulence. I discovered something I never would have imagined, a feeling of direction, clarity, and a future that seemed right at last. This is my story. It started with betrayal and heartache, but it's ending on a high. I lost the woman I thought would be in my life forever, but I got a friend, a young daughter to watch over, and a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in a long time. I feel ready to take on whatever life throws at me now that I'm not plagued by the past.